Let's talk about Frederic Jameson. Focusing on this, it's a book, but really Jameson's contribution is an essay with this title: An American Utopia, Dual Power, and the Universal Army. Now, Frederic Jameson, of course, he died a few months ago. He's, sort of by acclamation, one of the most important intellectual figures of the last 50 years. Highly, highly influential. Distinguished professor here and there and everywhere. Cited thousands of times. He's known best for this book. He's got several books that are very well known. Political Unconscious is another one. This one, Postmodernism, or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism. It's not surprising that Frederic Jameson did his dissertation on Sartre. Really. That might be one way you end up like this. And I think one thing, too, is, he is central to the discourse of postmodernism, people's understanding of postmodernism and late capitalism and all this stuff. Maybe he named late capitalism. No, he didn't. That's a much older idea. Actually, capitalism has been late since 1910 and was over around 1970. Okay, that's my view. But all right, but it's way late now, and we're still trying to figure out how it can be this late. And of course, Jameson is famous for saying that it's easier to imagine the end of the world rather than the end of capitalism. To which I can only say again, I think we don't have to imagine it. We've seen it, okay? With the total state domination of the world economy, even in the least state-dominated sectors, or governments like the U.S., the state runs about 50% of the economy at least, and affects the other 50%. What the fuck do you want, man? All of it is the answer. Now, so I think, did I start on this? We could talk about two postmodernisms, and I think this will be a theme in a couple of episodes. A authoritarian and an anti-authoritarian postmodernism. Of course, the authoritarians don't regard themselves as authoritarians. They just assert the authoritarianism as harshly as possible, and then they assert that they're not authoritarians as severely as possible, because that's the kind of thinkers they are. All right, so the authoritarian postmodernism of figures like, a number of whom are collected in this book, which also has this theory, the spirit of the dual power and the universal army, kind of organized by Žižek. These are the authoritarian postmodernists, people like Rancière, Vadimo, Žižek, Badiou, extremely. And then there's anti-authoritarian postmodernists, and they hate each other, man. Especially the authoritarian postmodernists are always ragging on the anti-authoritarian postmodernists like Foucault, Deleuze, Lyotard. Never guess whose side I'm on this. I think those are genuinely anti-authoritarian philosophers, and I appreciate their contributions. Now, the basic idea of this thing is that we used to have a beautiful, hopeful, utopian vision, by which Jameson means Marx, and Marxist-fueled utopian visions. We used to think the revolution was just about to happen, and at least revolution is possible, and we would be imagining the beautiful world after the revolution. But now we can't do that because capitalism has destroyed our imagination. Late capitalism has destroyed our imagination. Neoliberal austerity, in which the state only controls 70% of the economy, has destroyed our imaginations. And if the state controlled 100% of our economy, as immediately suggested by this book and many others, then our imaginations would be liberated. For real. All right, so we can't imagine a beautiful new world, and we used to be able to do that. So let's imagine it. Let's do it again. And Žižek and many others, people who wrote papers in this book, and others, people in this book, took amazing inspiration from Jameson's vision. So let's articulate Jameson's vision. Dual power in the universal army. Dual power is a notion from Lenin. Jameson's heroes, like Žižek's and others, Badiou, are Robespierre and Lenin. They admire their murderousness above all. For real. Okay, so dual power is a Lenin concept, which he coined to describe the relation early on, very early in the Soviet period, of the Soviets, self-organized worker collectives running factories and farms versus the state. Those are the two powers. Now, I want to note that the Soviet solution to the dual power thing was total crushing of the Soviets and forced collectivization. Okay. And Jameson does envision that too. This dual power thing has gotten very popular on the left over a long period of time. The example often given, and Jameson starts with this, although I gotta say he abandons the dual power theme a few paragraphs into this essay. And it doesn't have anything to do with anything after that, really. But the example is the Black Panther Party, which sets up, in a situation in which there's social services are limited by racism and poverty and systemic injustice in places like Oakland. The Black Panther Party, late 60s, early 70s, sets up like a whole social service world, breakfasts, free breakfast for poor kids and stuff like this, and educational institutions and stuff. And you could have the idea that eventually the institutions, highly progressive or revolutionary institutions of the Black Panther Party, could just kind of supersede public education and public services in Oakland. And then that would become, then the government, as was known before, this is fantasy, of course, because the government just crushed the Black Panther Party. That eventually the government would wither away in the Marxist style and be replaced by the Black Panther Party, now much expanded or sort of identical with the neighborhood situation. All right, lovely vision, I guess, and that is a pretty inspiring notion. And it's an idea of how you kind of get to a better world without a paroxysm of murderous violence, right? Like it ends up replacing the state. Some very progressive humanist party. Now, the Universal Army, though, that's what's the dual power here. Dual power in the Universal Army. And actually, what Jameson and Žižek envision here is simply a military coup. The army, the dual power is that the army becomes its own center of power. The existing army becomes its own center of power and takes over the government. Democratic and Republican style institutions are just capitalist agents of oppression. But what will happen in this fantasy, man, there's no way to get from here to there, I'll say this, but is that the military will become more and more pervasive in the whole society, conscript everyone, replace the whole economy. You'll be working for the army, in the army, as the army for the rest of your life. Everyone will. Forced labor, because that's one of the most inspiring features of Lenin's conception, and Trotsky's, actually. Although we won't have to do that much forced labor, because a few hours a week should be enough to do us, right? Like once we get rid of the capitalist profit motive and stuff. So a total militarization of society, slavery in the form of forced militaristic labor, that is the inspiring, transformative vision that Frederic Jameson brings back to us in our hopeless moment. All right, so let me try a few bits of this. The amazing thing, one thing about this is how bad it is, just how casual it is. Like I say, the dual power is first expressed as a completely central, important notion, and then abandoned 3 paragraphs later, man. Like, we're just sort of casually going like, stuff like this, man. We're going to make the populations of New York and Shanghai switch. Ha 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 ha, just to show we can. That's fun, man. That's going to be silly and great, you know? And it's going to show our collective agency. And we're going to have to kill a few thousand to make that happen, probably, but or whatever, you know. The conscription, he says, this is what he's envisioning as the dual power. The conscription of the entire population into some sort of glorified National Guard. That's what he's proposing. That's his ideal. That's the way he is returning hope to us. The conscription of the entire population into the National Guard. So the first step in my utopian proposal is, so to speak, the renationalization of the army along the lines of any number of other socialist candidates for nationalization. The government already controls the army. But anyway, by reintroducing the draft to transform the present armed forces back into that popular mass force capable of coexisting successfully with an increasingly unrepresentative representative government and transforming it into a vehicle for mass democracy rather than the representative kind. You got to think what Marxists really mean and Leninists really mean by mass democracy, okay? Well, they mean universal conscription and forced labor, okay? So the representative democracy government will wither away, and all that will be left is the military junta. And that's what Jameson wants. And that's what Jameson and Žižek view as the outcome of this whole utopian tradition and this whole beautiful leftist vision of Lenin and Mao and Marx. At least they're telling you what they want, so you can, just repudiate it in their face, man, if you have any decency or rationality. First of all, the body of eligible draftees would be increased by including everyone from age 16 to 50, or if you would prefer, 60 years of age. That is virtually the entire adult population. Such an unmanageable body. This is the Hegel fantasy, too, of all the people identical with the state. The universal army. Hegel thought of it like that, too, I think. Such an unmanageable body would henceforth be incapable of waging foreign wars because it's just too stupid and inefficient, let alone carrying out successful coups. But they've already overthrown the representative government. In order to emphasize the universality of the process, let's add that the handicapped would all be found appropriate positions in the system. Yay. And that pacifists and conscientious objectors would be placed in control of arms development, arms storage, and the like. Pacifists and conscientious objectors would be placing control of arms development, arms storage, and the like. So surely that's a little joke, just a flippant joke. But now, immediately, a few paragraphs in, Jameson is manifesting the kind of flippant cynicism that he is repudiating in favor of utopian hope. Ha ha ha! We'll put the pacifists in charge of the weapons. And plus, we're just making shit up. Like, we're just like, in our ideal world, the pacifists will be in charge of the weapons, even though that makes no fucking sense at all, right? And we're just throwing stuff out. Like, this is the most whimsical totalitarianism the world has ever known. Casual, whimsical oppression. Casual, whimsical, purposeless murder. For real. In our new universal system, of course, military hospitals will become free national health service, open to everyone. And now these are the positive arguments for like universal army. An army can be relatively egalitarian. Wait, that's not true. Who says that though? At least it can overcome differences of identity, like ethnic differences and stuff like this. Class differences can melt away in an army. But army is incredibly hierarchical, so like equality is not a feature of a army unless you're like this sort of economic determinist. In our new universal system, of course, military hospitals would become a free national health service open to everyone. And the entire center of gravity of universal health care, and also I would add pharmaceutical production, disease control, and experimentation experimentation with and production of new medicines would now be reorganized and situated within the army itself. Now, this is just Marx's 10-point program, somewhat elaborated and put on a totally military basis. We may also assume a reorientation of education itself under military auspices. Yeah, the army will be grabbing and re-educating your children. Not merely for the children of this military population, but for various advanced degrees. Nowadays, it is difficult to think of any kind of advanced training, save perhaps for business schools, that would not be required within this system. We may think of socialist countries as models of our situation, in which various armies included such functions as the manufacture of clothing, the production of films. The army will be our cultural producer, our novelist. Again, like this is the army as our novelist is really one of the beautiful, inspiring visions of late Marxism. Way, way late Marxism. The eventual production of motor vehicles, a writers' union. Intellectuals and writers find their space and income. All right, etc., etc. That's the beautiful utopian vision of Frederic Jameson and Slavoj Žižek, who endorses this completely. All right, I don't know if I'll get a little more pieces here. All right, well, I know these pauses are hard to deal with. Where are my notes even? We can do it. I swear to God, we can do it. All right. He suggests on page 78 this switching the populations. Now, one feature of Žižek's work is its synthesis of Marx and Freud, or Marx and Lacan, Lenin and Lacan. Žižek does that. Terry Eagleton does it. It's just a commonplace. You run into this everywhere, this kind of synthesis of Freud and Marx. So let me say, first of all, no. Are you kidding me, man? Come on now. Marxist materialism and forces of production versus Freudian, the roiling ancient Greek symbolism in your head, the your complexes, your neuroses and shit like that. Like Marx really doesn't have any time for your neuroses, Buster. All right. So, and then Lacan makes it even worse, actually. Like, this stuff is just not going to make any sense together. All right, but they work it in many different ways. And, I guess one thing I would draw your attention to is how slavish this is. Like, these are not really original figures. They're just trying to work out the details of other people's stuff and get them all together in a big stew. Now, the way that Jameson, with his universal conscription, his happy totalitarianism, gets these things together is at the level of base, the material conditions of production. It's going to be universal conscription and forced labor. But at the level of superstructure, it's going to be the wildest id expressions that you can imagine. Like, you're going to be totally free at the level of, although the passage I just read contradicts that completely. But anyway, that you're going to be totally free at the level of superstructure to do anything you want. And Jameson says he wants crimes and bizarre transgressions and shit like this. But that just sits there with the universal militarization and conscription. And there's no even attempt to make them compatible. He gives a function for psychoanalysis in his Utopia, which is, he talks about the psychoanalytic. Right, he's going to do a new institution to run the whole society. Here's our new dictator. We may provisionally call this new institution, and like I say, this is so flippant, so casual, so half-assed, and so disgusting. We may provisionally call this new institution the Psychoanalytic Placement Bureau, and it will, in conjunction with unimaginably complex computer systems, handle and organize all forms of employment, as well as all manner of personal and collective therapies. Mediating between the individual and the collectives, the new institution will combine the functions of a union and a hospital. The Psychoanalytic Placement Bureau will combine the functions of a union and a hospital, an employment office and a court, a market research agency, a polling bureau, and a social welfare center. Presumably, what is left of the police as an institution will eventually be absorbed into the Psychoanalytic Placement Bureau, which will eventually replace government and political structures equally, and the state thereby withering away into some kind of enormous group therapy. Now, is that compatible with the state withering away into a totally militarized, conscripted army of everyone? Is there anything in Frederic Jameson? Oh man, this shit is so ridiculous. It's astounding. And I think when you go and read the previous Jameson with the later Jameson in mind, you will see, if you open your mind, that there is nothing in Frederic Jameson. There's just a lot of yip-yap, okay? And if you're finding real inspiration in these visions of oppression, I think you should self-examine, all right? And maybe read some David Graeber or something like that, or some Michel Foucault would help. So this is a disgusting totalitarian vision, so-called totalitarian, quote-unquote totalitarian vision. And it's the most flippant, casual, uselessly unthought. And also it's built on all these categories that are fictional, like late capitalism, okay, or neoliberalism. It's just outstanding. And so in 1 minute, he's talking about the hard material conditions of production and class, and the next minute he's talking about the mother's phallus. The mother's phallus. Because he's a psychoanalyst, like he's reading Lacan, right? Like Eagleton, Žižek, fucking bullshit on you, man. And have your own thoughts for a minute. And don't try to combine these obviously totally incompatible things that you admire them both. That doesn't mean that they are the same thing or that they can be reasonably combined. And if you try to combine them into a political vision, all these ridiculous nightmares emerge. And these are the major figures of our intellectual tradition now. These are our award winners, man. These are our distinguished professors, bro. Do you hear what they're saying now? We're going to conscript everybody and switch the populations of New York and Shanghai, and and it's going to be 100% forced labor from now on. Let's promote him to distinguished professor here at Duke, man. Like, of course. Now, one thing I want to point out, just want to leave you with this, all of Frederic Jameson's authorship. All of Frederic Jameson's authorship is based around one idea, or rather, one phrase. As such. He uses the phrase as such all the time, randomly. And I think you should let that affect your assessment of him as a writer and a thinker. Like, what kind of person just tacks on as such on any given abstract noun half the time and half the time not, and thinks he's expressed something? Well, as someone who thinks that as such lends a kind of weight to an abstract concept, and that you will be very impressed by this and kind of blown away by its profundity. But it's not anything. So let me just give you a few examples of as such, as suchness from this book. The fetish as such. I don't think he did the mother's phallus as such, but the fetish as such, the state as such, the collective as such. That's what we're afraid of if we're afraid of totalitarianism, the collective as such. Consciousness as such. Population as such. Military democracy as such. Politics as such. Unemployment as such. I wonder what the difference exactly is between unemployment and unemployment as such. Or I guess what I could say is like, Frederic Jameson sucks, man. He just sucks. But Frederic Jameson as such is extremely impressive. Postmodernism as such, capitalism as such, the smartphone itself, the smartphone in itself, the military as such, Utopia as such, warfare as such, the political as such, this is all in 40 pages, class struggle as such, history as such, the antisocial as such, antagonism as such, money as such, groups as such. Right. There is nothing here as such. Slavoj Žižek really admires this, and Elaine Badiou too, and all kinds of leftists all over the world. And now you know who those people are. Later.